Shalom Aleichem. We're now towards the end of Shiva of Harav Agoyin, Harav Chosid, Hatomim, Reb Yoel ben Reb Yoel Nachman Akoyin Kahan, Reb Yoel Khan. So I want to share a few more thoughts that I didn't speak about in the last video. I recall walking up Kingston Avenue with Reb Yoel. This was already Tafshin Nun Beis, Nun Gimel. It was after the Rebbe had the stroke. And there was a lot of back and forth amongst Lubavitcher Chassidim. And I mentioned to him something to see his take on the issue. And he became so adamant, so livid, so emotional, that he literally was not shouting, but he was loud talking to me on Union and Kingston. I remember where it was. And people looked from across the street. They said, Reb Yoel Khan, Reb Yoel was alive. There are many mashpiyim. Of course, like I said in the last video, no one comes to his mind and his memory and his asbara and his... But here's another aspect. That he was a lebedik mensch, and that's why he attracted, especially the Bacharim, us students, and many others. So a lebedik mensch, you don't press a button. Now be quiet. Now be louder. The way he felt at the time about an issue that's being discussed that touched him deeply, he spoke about it full force. This great intellectual giant talks about it in such an emotional way. I recall sitting once at the table. The Shabbos table is only myself, Reb Yoel, and Rebbe Leah. And Reb Yoel went out for a moment, so I asked Rebbe Leah, I asked her about a certain issue that we were discussing, and she said to me, by Reb Yoel, everything begins and ends with the kavod for the Rebbe. That is his central nekuda. From there, everything follows. If he feels that it's the kavod of the Rebbe, he speaks about it in a certain way. If he feels it's against the kavod of the Rebbe, he will protest and speak about it another way. Whatever we were discussing, I don't recall, but it's something bewildered me, and I didn't follow exactly why he's taking this attitude, and this is what she said, and it still remains with me till today, that the nekuda of the kavod of the Rebbe is the driving force what drives this man. Talking about him being a lebedik mensch, a live person. I remember a Fabrengen Tofshin Samach Aleph. It was Simchas Torah. And Reb Yoel wasn't the type to drink and zhlok and mashke, become crazy. And, he said l'chaim, and he said lots of l'chaim, but it was all with teicha and sitting calmly at a table, singing Chassidish niggun, and the way he sang was, who else sang that way? With the tnuas, the hergish, the feeling that you saw 200 years of Lubavitcher Chassidim, you saw in this individual. And then he explained a Maimer Chelekei of Malukit, the idea of that the Reyes Loi Ozav Tzai Marisoi, and he started to cry bitterly. I remember it was, and there were only a few of us at the table, and you could see the pain he's in. Okay, now some will say, he was never in pain. Shtusim. This is a Yid that was a Baal Regesh, but it didn't usually come out because his seichel was so strong. But at the times when it came out, you saw that he was Ish Bein Ho'anoshim was hat gefielt farat Zweiten, and that explain with all of his explaining why Le'ozav Tzei Marisoi, the Rebbe is here and everything else, Alzheimer's, he's in great pain. So, as much as we want to just focus on the simcha, the good, Rabbi Say, if you want to know a person, you have to look at the person from the beginning to the end. Another point, who was his mashpia? Reb Chaim Shalom Brook. And I spoke to his chaverim and people of the time, the Gararis, the Dubinsky, Blazinski. They were all of a certain style, and the Reb Chaim Sholem is the one who who was the one who formed them, and it was an elated style, meaning they were big Yiddish Shemayim's. The idea of wasting time with gaiva and kavod and honor, and he said this and she said this, and all these narishkeiten didn't matter to them. Reb Yoel told me how when he and a friends asked to go learn Chassidus by the Moshe Geradi, Reb Chaim Shoel Brook, who told me he had Bekias and Havana Chassidus. And Reb Moshe Geradi had the additional Amkis, depth. And he said, Reb Chaim Shoel said, gate, of course. And Reb Chaim Shoel was pushing Reb Moshe Geradi to teach them a few times a week Chassidus. So he learned by a person who, again, wasn't, full of himself. These are my Talmidim, I'm going to send him to another Mashpia. It reminds me, like in Slabotkin and a certain Litv yeshivas, even in Europe. It's like they were so careful not to send their Talmidim to another yeshiva or to grab the best Talmidim. Chas v'sholom, they should learn by a yeshiva that knows better than them. But going back to Reb Yoel as it pertains to us in this clip, his concern for a bocher to be a proper chassid, to go in the right way, he spent a lot of time on that. And then I remember a time I went over to him about a certain friend who, whatever reason, started to become a little modern, and he was a good friend, and I wanted to give him a chelik. I wanted to, tell him off, what's going on. And I asked Reb Yoel what I should do, and he said, "Zos nicht sagen kein Wort." Don't say a word. And I didn't. I followed his advice, and he came back, and he became back to his youthful Hasidic self. Reb Yoel taught Chassidus for over 50 years here in Borough Park to the Polish and Ungarische Hasidim. Thousands and thousands, and I'm not exaggerating, learned Chassidus with him. My neighbor would go to his shiur for 2 years while it was still, I believe, at the Simpson Shul on 46th Street before it moved over to Beis Menachem on 16th Avenue. And he told me, one Shabbos I was sitting with him, he told me, I would walk out of those shiurim saying, here is a man who really believes in the Eibishter, in God. And this person, aboard mit the Streimel, and he learns, and he's a Yiddish Shemayim and everything. At the time, he was a bocher, and they had questions, and they couldn't find within their own community a person like Reb Yoel that believed and really believed in the Eibishter, in God. And this is what he said every shiur. After a Tanya shiur, he said, besides the Tanya and the Pshat and all that, which was phenomenal, he says, he always said to himself, this man really believes. Glaubt. Rabbi Say, Chevre, Reb Yoel's teachings are online. The shiurim are online. Herzlich zu, listen to them. You'll have tainug nafshi. You push it have pleasure. Listen to a Fabrengen, listen to a niggin, the way he sings a niggin, and you won't be able to leave the screen. You'll cry, you'll dance, you'll think, you'll feel. We don't need to take pills. We need to take Reb Yoel's Fabrengens, Reb Yoel's nigunim, instead of pills, instead of therapy, instead of psychology. Warf sich herein, immerse yourself in this, and I promise you, you'll feel better. You'll feel released. You'll find an avenue in which you can flourish. So the Eibishter helfen, as we conclude Shiva, should be an end to all sorrow. Should be an end to death. Mashiach Zoshin Kumin, the Poil. There's no question that Reb Yoel, as he said at the end of his life, and a person told me, who heard this from one of the Bacharim who took care of him, this is probably in the last month, he said, I'm ready to go. He felt already, it's time. His time is coming. He said, Ich darf nur senden Reb noch einmal. I have to see the Rebbe. I'd like to see the Rebbe just one more time. Und ich bin great gehen, and I'm ready to go. So now he's seen the Rebbe. He's with the Rebbe. So it's time now for him and the Rebbe and Kol Klal Yisrael to have Tchias HaMesim, Mashiach Zoshin Kumin, Bepoil Mamish in actuality, and we should have a Kitzur Anu Sheikh Na'ofar V'hu B'teichem, Reb Yoel Ben, Reb Rafal Nachman HaKoyen Khan, with Klal Yisrael, B'mhedim Yemenu Amen V'Yamin.